The sky above Terra was no longer a sky. It was a wound. Warp lightning clawed across the heavens in jagged veins of sickly violet and burning gold, splitting clouds that screamed as they tore apart. The Astronomicon flickered like a dying star, its holy radiance drowning beneath tides of impossible color. Demons howled across the walls of the Imperial Palace, their laughter echoing through shattered spires and blood-choked courtyards. Titans burned where they stood. Legions clashed knee-deep in corpses. The siege of Terra had reached its final heartbeat. Above it all, the vengeful spirit hung like a crowned executioner. Its guns were silent, its hold swollen with the promise of an ending. Within its blackened halls, time itself recoiled. The Emperor of Mankind strode through corridors that had once been forged for his favoured son. His golden armour was cracked and blackened, its brilliance dimmed by eons of war compressed into a single night. Psychic fire coiled around him, the last blazing core of humanity's future given form. Every step left the echo of a god walking to his own judgment. Ahead of him stood Horus Lupercal. The War Master stood at the heart of the flagship sanctum, a cathedral of steel and bone reshaped by the warp. The walls pulsed like living flesh. Chains inscribed with blasphemous runes hung from the ceiling, rattling in rhythm with a heartbeat that was not the ship's. Horus loomed beneath a corona of screaming light, his armor swollen and reshaped by chaos. No longer merely plate, but a living shell of demonic iron and burning scripture. His eyes were suns. "Father," Horus said, and the word fractured reality. "You are late." The Emperor raised his sword. Its blade hummed with ancient power, a note of pure annihilation that made demons recoil and the ship itself scream in protest. "You are lost, my son." Horus laughed. It was not the laugh of a warrior or a prince. It was the laughter of the warp itself. Layered voices echoing through his throat. Khorne's fury, Tzeentch's knowing mirth, Nurgle's gurgling delight, and Slaaneish's ecstatic hunger. Lost, Horus spread his arms, and the immaterium poured from him in roaring waves. "I see everything now. I see the lie you built humanity upon. I see the cage you would have bound us all within." They collided like gods. The first blow shattered the chamber. The Emperor struck with the fury of a dying star, his blade carving a canyon through Horus's armor, holy fire ripping demonic flesh from bone. Horus staggered, but did not fall. Warp energy surged, sealing the wound in a heartbeat, replacing lost matter with screaming faces and coiling runes. Horus answered with a blow that broke reality. His claw struck the Emperor's chest, sending him crashing through pillars of corrupted adamantium, his form skidding across the deck in a storm of golden sparks. The vengeful spirit groaned, bulkheads buckling under the strain of two impossible forces colliding within its heart. They rose again and again and again. Psychic storms detonated with every exchange. The Emperor unleashed his mind like a weapon, hurling visions of unity, of humanity's potential, of a galaxy unchained from gods. Horus tore them apart with contempt, feeding them to the warp, turning hope into screaming fuel. Demons poured into the chamber, only to be obliterated instantly by the Emperor's presence, their deaths screaming back into the immaterium as a warning. But still, Horus advanced. "You made us tools," Horus snarled, blood, real and unreal, pouring from his wounds. "You made me a weapon and called it love." The Emperor struck again, severing Horus's arm at the shoulder. The War Master roared, but laughed even as the limb fell. Warp lightning engulfed the stump, and a new arm tore its way into existence, clawed and vast, dripping raw unreality. "I am not your son anymore," Horus said. "I am Ascension." He unleashed everything. The warp answered him like a god answering his prayer. The chamber collapsed inward as chaos poured through Horus, fourfold and infinite. Gravity twisted, time paused. The Emperor screamed as raw, annihilating power crushed down upon him. Horus struck again and again, each blow carrying the weight of a god's hatred. The Emperor fought, burning brighter with every wound, his psychic presence blazing like a final dawn. But even gods can be drowned. Horus seized the Emperor by the throat, lifting him from the deck as reality unraveled around them. The Emperor's sword fell from his grasp, clattering to the deck, its light dimming. "For 10,000 years, Horus said, his eyes blazing with apocalyptic fire, "you would have chained humanity to your throne." He drove his claw into the Emperor's chest. Warp energy detonated outward, rippling through his golden armor and divine flesh alike. The Emperor convulsed, his psychic scream echoing across the galaxy, felt by every psyker, every astropath, every soul bound to him. For a heartbeat, the warp itself recoiled in awe. Then Horus crushed his heart. The light went out. The Emperor of mankind fell limp in Horus's grasp. His form already began to fade, unraveling into dusts of dying starlight. Horus released him, and the Emperor's body struck the deck with a sound that echoed like a tomb sealing shut. Silence followed. Then the warp howled in triumph. Across Terra, the impossible happened. The Emperor's psychic presence vanished, and with it, the bulwark holding back the tides of chaos. Demonic incursions exploded across the palace. The Astronomicon guttered and died, plunging the galaxy into sudden, screaming darkness. Loyalist lines buckled as terror and despair ripped through their souls. The traitor legions roared. World-eaters charged with renewed fury, slaughtering the defenders to the last man. Word-bearers raised shrines of flesh and bone atop the palace walls. The Iron Warriors breached bastion after bastion as if the defenses had turned to dust. Titans bearing the Eye of Horus strode forward unchallenged, their guns annihilating loyalist strongholds in seconds. The warp surged, thick and alive. At the Lion's Gate, Jagatai Khan stood astride a mountain of dead. His armor was broken, his blade nicked and stained black with demonic ichor. White scars lay broken around him, but still he fought, a storm-given flesh. He laughed as he killed, wild and defiant, his speed blurring into myth as he cut down traitors by the dozen. A roar split the air. Mortarion descended like a plague, his wings unfurled, his scythe dripping rot. Fulgrim followed, radiant and terrible, his blade singing with excess. Perturabo's guns thundered in the distance as the trap closed. "Come then," the Khan said, blood running into his eyes. "Let the galaxy remember how I died." They fell upon him. The Khan fought like a god of war, his blade carving arcs of impossible speed, cutting Fulgrim across the chest, shattering Mortarion's guard. But even he could not stand against 3 Primarchs, empowered by chaos. Mortarion's scythe pierced his side, Fulgrim's blade took his arm. Perturabo's guns thundered once, and the Khan fell, laughing even as death claimed him. The white scars broke. At the heart of the palace, Rogel Dawn was dragged from the rubble, battered but unyielding, his armor dented and scorched. He struggled against chains of living warp iron as Horus approached. The War Master towered over him, Emperor's blood still staining his claw. "Go on, kill me," Dawn spat. Horus smiled. "No," he said. "You will live. You will see what I build." Around them, the traitor Primarchs gathered. The palace burned, Terra screamed, and across the ruined planet, Chaos forces raised their weapons and roared their victory to the bleeding sky. The Emperor was dead. Horus Lupercal had won, and the galaxy would burn. The death of the Emperor reverberated across the Imperium with the weight of a galaxy collapsing. For a heartbeat, the stars themselves seemed to shudder, the light of distant suns dimming as if they too recognized the extinction of a god. And yet, even in the despair, there were those who moved. Vulcan's escape was like a shadow across the stars. The Salamander's Primarch had sensed it almost immediately. The abrupt severing of the psychic beacon that had guided humanity. The Emperor's light, once a constant fire in the warp, was snuffed out, leaving a void that screamed with malignant hunger. Vulcan had felt the tremor in his very bones, a sickness that clawed at his heart. With a roar of defiance and fury, he surged into the webway, stepping through a twisting, unseen path of corridors and shadows, leaving the fate of one of the last loyal Primarchs uncertain. The webway embraced him, its paths folded impossibly, carrying him through places neither fully real nor fully imagined. Where he would emerge no one knew. Where Vulcan would end, even he did not know. Far beyond the shattered gates of Terra, in the void between stars, the remaining forces of the Ultramarines and the Dark Angels had raced toward the Sol system. Guilliman's fleet, 1,000 vessels of blue and gold, tore through the warp with fury. The Lion's Dark Angels in stern formation beside them. Their psychers and astropaths were wrecked by the same tremor that had sent Vulcan fleeing. Their Emperor was dead. Guilliman's hands clenched around the command rod, his knuckles white. Reports flooded in across the network. Imperial Navy squadrons obliterated in the upper atmosphere. Titans burning. Entire hive cities reduced to ash or transformed into demonic altars. The psychic cries of Terra's defenders were audible even across the void. distorted and agonized, the sound of millions dying in terror and blood. The lion's voice cut across the comms, cold and precise. Guilliman, the planet, it is lost. The traitors have taken the palace. The War Master, he sits upon the throne. The Imperium, it is gone. Guilliman's chest tightened. He knew the lion did not exaggerate. He did not need to. The psychic resonance of the Emperor's death lingered, a wound in reality that even the mightiest psyker would struggle to ignore. Terra is lost, Guilliman said grimly. All forces diverted here will be annihilated. The silence of their fleets in the void was heavier than any gunfire. Then Guilliman's voice hardened, iron in its resolve. We cannot reclaim Terra. Not now. We must preserve what remains. Ultramar is strong. It is loyal. We regroup, we rally, and we endure. That is our charge. The lion's jaw tightened, eyes like cold fire beneath his hooded helm. And the civilians, they will burn. Guilliman did not answer. He did not need to. Even from tens of thousands of kilometers away, the reports made the horror palpable. The hive cities were aflame, rivers of molten metal and blood running down the streets, turning into chasms of fire. Demons had poured into the upper levels of the city like water from a broken dam. Priests and officials were dragged into the warp or consumed. Either way, they screamed. The retreat was orderly, a slow pain in the gut of humanity. Both fleets veered toward Ultramar, leaving behind the corpse of their homeworld, leaving Horus to claim his victory. Guilliman's face was a mask, but his eyes betrayed the fire of anger and a sorrow that would not be quenched. Back on Terra, Horus Lupercal sat upon the Emperor's throne, a massive structure of obsidian and warp-etched metal. The hall, once radiant with golden light and the purity of human design, was now a cathedral of torment and chaos. Smoke coiled like serpents through the shattered windows. Sparks from broken electrical conduits danced over the shattered mosaics, and pools of blood reflected the screaming sky outside. The traitor Primarchs and their legions roared in triumph on the surface, dancing through the rubble and corpses. Demons now roamed freely, their grotesque forms carving paths of fire and destruction across the hive cities. Word-bearers recited blasphemous liturgies, their chants resonating with the warp as buildings crumbled to reveal gaping rifts into the immaterium. Blood ran in rivers from the upper spires of the hives, flowing into the streets and canals already filled with the dead and dying. Horus surveyed the scene with the patience of a god who had finally seen the outcome of millennia of plotting. He lifted his claw, and the traitors fell silent in awe and fear, waiting for his next command. The warp churned around him like a storm, sensing its champion, its chosen instrument of annihilation. And yet, there was a flicker, a faint, almost imperceptible twitch in Horus's eyes, one of the few remnants of his humanity, or the shadow of it at least. He watched as children were consumed by demonic fire, as civilians screamed in the streets, as the sky itself bled across the ruined world. Even amidst his triumph, a seed of doubt, or something worse, stirred within him. A quiet, gnawing echo. This is not victory. This is carnage. The solar system itself began to die. A titanic warp storm formed above Terra, expanding like a black sun of agony. Lightning of impossible colour crackled and arced through the entire system, disintegrating orbiting ships. Demons, drawn through rifts wider than entire continents, poured through, cascading into cities, citadels, and palaces alike. On the streets, demonic forms tore through what little remained of Terra's inhabitants, slashing, devouring, burning. The screams of mortal humanity rose, twisted by the warp into a terrible chorus that made the very air taste of iron and sulphur. Cities collapsed under the sheer weight of the psychic terror unleashed. Entire hives flooded with blood, metal, and fire. Horus remained seated on his throne, a king of this ruin, as the traitor legions celebrated their triumph with carnage and fury. Yet that small flicker in his eyes grew heavier as he observed the world he had claimed. He had killed a god, shattered the Imperium, and bent the galaxy to his will. And yet, in that final moment, he saw the cost, the innocence, the billions of souls annihilated, the cities obliterated, the fires that would never be quenched. Even chaos, in all its unholy glory, seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Acknowledging that the victory was not pure, Horus's claw tapped against the armrest of the throne, echoing through the hall like a death knell. "Do you feel it?" whispered a voice, layered with the chorus of 4 gods, their tongues dripping with expectation. "The fullness of your power, Horus. You are ascendant. You are infinite." Horus closed his eyes, the throne's shadows shallowing his expression. The answer, whispered to himself and to the gods alike, was quiet and bitter. "I am infinite, and yet I am alone." On the surface, a great rift tore open above the palace, a gateway to the Immaterium. From it, demonic titans fell, their feet shattering the streets and rooftops alike. The legions of chaos surged, pouring into every crevice of the ruined cities. Across the skyline, the fires formed rivers. The warp storm painted the heavens with screaming colors, and the world itself groaned under the weight of its new master. And Horus, sitting upon the throne of a dead god, watched as the world burned. The warp spat them out like broken teeth. Above Ultramar, reality screamed as the last fragments of the loyalist fleets tore free of the Immaterium. Ships emerged trailing fire, void shields collapsing in flares of dying light. Some arrived fused to half-melted escorts. Others came out spinning, their hulls flensed by demonic claws. Decks opened to the vacuum where entire companies had vanished mid-scream. Many never arrived at all, lost to warp storms so violent that even their echoes were devoured. Of the armadas that had fled the Sol system, barely half remained. The echo of the Astronomicon, thin like a dying heartbeat, had guided them just long enough. The final whisper of the Emperor's light had stretched across madness and hell, flickering like a candle in a hurricane. But now it was gone. Gone forever. Silence followed. Not peace, never that. But the hollow quiet of survivors, realizing how close they had come to extinction. Ultramar received them with grim efficiency. Orbital docks burned day and night as damaged vessels were dragged into anchorage. Apothecaries and tech marines worked themselves into collapse, hauling the wounded from holds stacked knee-deep with the dead. Thunderhawks descended in endless cycles, disgorging battered Astartes whose armor was scorched black, their sigils defaced. Purity seals burned to ash. Many walked in silence. Some had to be carried. A few laughed until chaplains took them away. The realm of Ultramar still stood. Its worlds were intact. Its forges burned. Its people lived. But hope had arrived bleeding. Deep within the fortress of Hera, in a control chamber carved from adamantine and ancient stone, Rabute Guilliman stood motionless before a hololithic projection of the galaxy. It was all wrong. Rifts burned where stars should be. Entire sectors pulsed crimson, marked by demonic incursions, warp storms, and psychic annihilation. Imperial sigils winked out one by one, replaced by the Eye of Horus, by blasphemous runes, or by nothing at all. Guilliman's armor was still marked by the Heresy, the once blue ceramite dulled beneath ash and gore. Gold trim was dented or scraped raw. His helm rested beneath one arm, revealing a face drawn tight with exhaustion. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw clenched so hard it looked carved from stone. He had not slept since Terra burned. Beside him stood Lionel Johnson. The Lord of the First was a darker shadow in the chamber. His green armor too was scarred and cracked, his cloak torn and stiff with dried blood. His helm lay discarded on a command table, revealing sharp features hollowed by fatigue. The lion's eyes were cold, but not untouched. There was something brittle in them now, something wounded. They had buried worlds together in silence since arriving. Around them, servitors chanted binaric prayers as cogitators screamed data. Human officers spoke in clipped, shaking voices. Hololithic runes cascaded faster than they could be catalogued. "Report," Guilliman said at last. His voice was steady, but only just. A naval officer stepped forward, his face pale. Confirmed warp breaches in Segmentum Solar, Obscurus, and Pacificus. Demonic manifestations across at least 300 systems. Entire subsectors have gone dark. Another voice cut in. Astropathic choirs are failing, my lord. Without the Astronomicon, long-range communication is unreliable. Messages arrive fragmented. Many are just screams. Guilliman closed his eyes for a heartbeat. The Emperor was dead. The words still did not fit. They never would. The lion spoke, his voice low, edged like a blade dragged across stone. The traitor legions are not consolidating. They are expanding. This is not occupation. It is consumption. A hololithic image flared to life, a world on fire, its continents split by warp rifts. Another followed, an Imperium shrine world collapsing inward as demons poured from the sky. Another showed billions dying in minutes. The warp storms are growing, the lion continued, with Terra at its center, radiating outward. Guilliman opened his eyes. A new eye of Terra. Much larger, the lion said flatly. Silence fell. Then footsteps, heavy, unsubtle, and angry. The doors to the chamber burst open, and Leman Russ strode inside like a thunderhead given form. The Wolf King looked terrible. His armor was shattered in places, plates replaced by crude field repairs and raw adamantium braces. One pauldron bore the deep gouge of a demon blade. Another was burnt nearly black. His beard was matted with dried blood. Some his, most of it not. One eye was swollen and bruised, the skin around it dark with barely healed wounds. Behind him came what remained of the Space Wolves, grim, silent giants, fewer than there should have been, far fewer. Russ did not salute. He did not bow. He looked at Guilliman and the lion, and his snarl trembled with something dangerously close to grief. "So," he said, "it's true." No one corrected him. For a long moment the three Primarchs stood together, sons of a dead god, gathered beneath a broken sky. Russ exhaled sharply, a sound halfway between a laugh and a growl. "We felt it, the moment it happened, like the sun went out inside my skull." His fist clenched. "I hoped, fool that I am." Guilliman stepped forward. "How many made it, brother?" Russ's jaw tightened. "Enough to fight, not enough to win." He gestured back toward the doors. "The walls will bleed before they break." "But Terra," he shook his head violently. "By the Allfather, Terra," the lion cut in. "Terra is lost." Russ rounded on him, his fury blazing. "I know that. I want to know what we do about it." The chamber stirred uneasily. Guilliman raised a hand. "We survive," he said. "First." Russ laughed, hard and bitter. "Survive? Horus sits on our father's throne. He killed him." His voice cracked like a whip. "You want to wait?" "I want humanity to live," Guilliman snapped back, sudden fire breaking through his control. "Or there will be nothing left to avenge." The words hung between them like a blade. The lion nodded. "Guilliman is right. Look at us." He gestured to the hololith, burning worlds and collapsing stars. "We are wounded, depleted, cut off. To strike now would be suicide." Russ's hands trembled. He looked away, teeth bared, breathing heavy. Then quietly, "He has to die." "Yes," Guilliman said. "Horus must die." The lion's voice followed, colder now. "And he will." Russ turned back to them. "When?" Guilliman's shoulders sagged, just slightly. "Not now. We must rebuild. We will fortify Ultramar. We gather any loyalists where we can. We preserve knowledge, industry, but most importantly, people. We wait." "For what?" Russ snarled. "For a weakness," Guilliman replied. "For chaos to overreach. For Horus to fracture under the weight of what he's claimed. Chaos can never share power forever." The lion folded his arms. "We become a bastion, a knife hidden in the shadow." Russ stared at them for a long time. Then he turned away, pacing like a caged beast. "My father is dead," he growled. "My brothers are dead. The galaxy burns. If waiting is what saves mankind, then I will wait." Guilliman placed a hand on his brother's arm. Russ did not pull away. Outside the chamber, Ultramar's skies filled with the smoke of a galaxy at war. Ships continued to arrive, fewer each hour. Reports continued to flood in, worse with every passing hour. But in that chamber, beneath flickering hololiths and the weight of impossible loss, 3 Primarchs stood together. Not as conquerors, not as gods, but as guardians of the last light humanity had left. The Emperor was dead. Horus now ruled Terra, and somewhere in the darkness between the stars, the long war for survival had just begun. Terra no longer slept, it screamed. The Imperial Palace, once a monument to human defiance, reason and dominion, had become a nightmare-given architecture. Its golden spires were twisted into clawed shapes, their surfaces weeping metal and warp ichor. The walls pulsed like organs, vaulted halls stretched and contracted, geometry bending in ways that made mortal eyes ache and even bleed. Where sunlight had once poured through stained crystal, there was now only a rolling sky of bruised purple and diseased gold, split by constant warp lightning that struck the palace itself as if reality were trying to flay it open. The throne world burned from pole to pole. Chaos Space Marines stalked the halls in packs, laughing, howling, hunting. Their armor bore fresh sigils etched in blood and screaming script, trophies nailed to their pauldrons, hands, faces, shattered aquilae torn from loyalist breastplates. Demons drifted beside them like pets or parasites, clawing at reality with idle malice. Any survivors were not prisoners. They were entertainment. In what had once been the Hall of Leng, a knot of traitor Astartes dragged a lone figure in scorched gold across the floor. A Custodes, one of the Emperor's companions. His armor cracked, Guardian's spear snapped in half. His helm torn away to reveal a face burned raw by warp fire, but still defiant. "Look at him," a World Eater snarled, spittle hissing where it struck the floor. Still trying to glare. The Custodes spat blood and said nothing. They chained him upright against a pillar that had once depicted the Emperor in triumph. The stone relief now wept faces, mouths open in eternal screams. A word-bearer stepped forward, chanting softly as if reciting scripture. Warp fire blossomed. The Custodes burned. He did not scream, not at first. His flesh blackened, armor glowing white-hot, as laughing traitors jeered and took turns carving symbols into his chest with crackling blades. When he finally roared, it was not in pain but in rage, in defiance, in a final futile denial of the reality consuming him. Horus watched it all from the steps of the throne. He now sat upon the throne of Terra, but it was no longer gold. The Emperor's throne had been reshaped, corrupted, into a vast structure of obsidian, bone, and warp-forged metal. Veins of sickly light pulsed through it like a heart, faces pressed outward from its surface, some screaming, some whispering, some praying. Chains of living iron coiled around its base, bound to nothing and everything at once. Horus Lupercal, Warmaster, Ascendant, Emperor of mankind, sat upon it with one clawed hand resting against the armrest. He was crowned in fire. Warp energy wreathed him constantly now, a storm barely contained within his form. His armor had grown heavier, etched with scripture that rewrote itself moment to moment. His eyes burned with power that bent the air around them. Reality acknowledged him now, not as a man, but as a locus of divinity. The Chaos Gods watched through him, and yet, something inside Horus recoiled. He had watched the Custodes burn, watched the laughter, watched the casual cruelty, the purposeless torment. For a heartbeat, he remembered another time, standing beside these same golden warriors, hearing their voices in measured respect, fighting alongside them for a united humanity. The memory stabbed him like a knife. "Enough," Horus said. His voice rolled through the hall like thunder. Reality shuddered. The laughter faltered. The Custodes was already dead by the time the flames were extinguished. His charred form slumped against the warped pillar. The traitors stepped back, confused and irritated. Horus did not look at them again. The throne groaned as he stood, warp energy spilling outward in a wave that sent lesser demons skittering away. His gaze swept the hall, once the heart of the Imperium, now a charnel cathedral of madness. This is not what I wanted. The thought came unbidden, almost treasonous. The great doors at the far end of the hall split open with a shriek of tortured metal, and the traitor Primarchs entered. Fulgrim came first, radiant and terrible, his snake-like form coiling gracefully across the broken floor. His armor shimmered like liquid amethyst, his many eyes glittering with delight as he took in the carnage. He smiled, lips too wide, teeth too perfect. Behind him strode Perturabo, massive and ironclad, his armor bristling with weapons and data spines. His expression was a storm of calculation and barely contained contempt. Servo skulls orbited him, projecting maps, schematics, and kill zones. Mortarion followed, drifting rather than walking, his wings spreading pestilence through the air. The stink of rot and decay went ahead of him, his scythe trailing clouds of corpse smoke. His hooded gaze lingered on the burning halls with grim satisfaction. Angron came last. He did not walk so much as stump, his chain axes dragging sparks from the floor. His armor was soaked in blood, fresh and dry alike, his eyes blazing with endless rage. Demons clung to him like parasites, screaming encouragement. They gathered before Horus, the conquerors of Terra, the architects of damnation. "My Emperor," Fulgrim purred, bowing with exaggerated grace. "What a marvelous coronation. I do hope you appreciate what we've done with the place." Horus said nothing. Perturabo snorted. "The planet is secured," he said bluntly. "Mostly. Some small resistance pockets remain in the lower hives and sub-level vaults. They will be eradicated within the day. I've begun fortification plans of the Sol system. It will be unassailable." "Boring," Angron growled. "Let it burn. Let them fight. What's the point of ruling ashes if they don't scream first?" Mortarion inclined his head slightly. "The warp storm is stable, growing. Terra will become a beacon, not of light, but of inevitability. Death will come swiftly to those who resist." Horus finally spoke. "No." The word cracked the air like a whip. The 4 Primarchs stilled. Horus descended the steps of the throne slowly, each footfall leaving fractures in the stone. He looked at them, not as brothers, but as forces barely leashed. Humanity is not to be annihilated, Horus said. It is to be ruled and led. Angron barked a laugh. Ruled. You sound like him. Fulgrim tilted his head, curious. Oh, do tell. Horus's claw tightened. The Imperium failed because it was built on a lie, because it shackled humanity to a tyrant and called it salvation. I will not repeat that mistake. Perturabo's eyes narrowed. Then what do you propose? Order, Horus said. A new order. The warp will be harnessed, not unleashed blindly. Worlds will be governed. Tithes will be taken. Humanity will be saved. Mortarian's voice oozed amusement. You cannot control decay, brother. Angron stepped forward. And I will not be told where I can and cannot kill. Fulgrim laughed softly. Nor will I deny myself pleasure for the sake of your vision. The air thickened. Horus felt it then. The fracture. The truth the Emperor had warned him of, buried beneath lies and pride. Chaos did not unite. It consumed, it divided. It promised power, but gave only entropy. You will obey, Horus said, warp energy flaring violently around him. For a moment, the traitor Primarchs hesitated. Then Perturabo spoke. We did not come this far to trade one tyrant for another. Fulgrim's smile sharpened. The galaxy is vast, Horus. Surely there is room for compromise. Mortarian's wings rustled. My domains will spread as they must. Angron snarled. I will go where the blood is thickest. Horus looked at them and saw it clearly now. They were already gone. Each Primarch turned away, some laughing, some silent, some furious. Already their thoughts reached outward, claiming sectors, systems, entire swaths of the galaxy as personal kingdoms. The Eye of Horus would not unite them forever. Soon brother would turn on brother again. The hall grew quiet as they departed, and Horus stood alone amid the screaming palace. He looked out across Terra, across burning continents, the collapsing cities, the oceans boiling beneath warp storms. He felt the power coursing through him, vast and intoxicating. He could crush stars now with a thought. He could reshape reality. And yet, he remembered the Emperor's eyes in his final moment. Not hatred, not fear, but sorrow. Horus clenched his fist, the throne beneath him, groaning in sympathetic agony. I won, he told himself. I had to. But as the screams of terror echoed endlessly through the night, as the gods whispered their approval and hunger in his mind, doubt crept in like a poison. What if this was not ascension? What if this was damnation wearing a crown? Horus Lupercal, Emperor of a broken mankind, sat upon a dead god's throne, and for the first time since Terra had fallen, he wondered whether he had doomed the very species he had sought to free. The galaxy burned, and somewhere deep beneath the roar of chaos, regret began to grow. Years passed, not counted in calendars anymore. There were too many now, too many broken realms pretending time still meant something. But it was felt in scars, in entropy, in the way the galaxy screamed a little louder each cycle. Terra endured. That alone was a miracle. The throne world still lived, if the word could be stretched to fit something so mutilated. Warp storms clawed endlessly at its orbit, a permanent wound in reality that never healed. The Imperial Palace had finished transforming long ago, settling into a grotesque equilibrium. Part fortress, part cathedral, part living thing. Its towers no longer melted or screamed constantly. Now they breathed. The warp had learned the shape of Terra, and Terra had learned how to survive it. So had Horus. He stood in the Hall of Dominion, once the Senatorium Imperialis, now a vast chamber of iron, obsidian, and chained sigils, staring at a hololithic map of the galaxy. He was taller now, not in the proud martial way he had once been, but elongated, subtly wrong. His armor had fused to him in places, grown barbs and veins of pulsing warp light that crawled across its surface like living script. One arm, his claw, was monstrously oversized, fingers ending in talons that flexed with a mind of their own. Cracks webbed across his breastplate, leaking golden black energy that burned the air around him. His face, that was worse. One eye still burned with terrible intelligence, sharp and focused. The other glowed like a dying star, warp light flickering behind the pupil. Horn-like growths curled back from his temples, restrained by bands of inscribed adamantium, runes of binding, not devotion. Veins of black fire traced beneath his skin, flaring brighter whenever the warp whispered too loudly. He was in constant pain. That was the price. The Chaos Gods clawed at him endlessly, each trying to finish what Terra had started, to hollow him out, to wear his flesh like a crown. But Horus refused them all. He had reforged the Emperor's wards, twisted Malkador's old sigils, bound demonic pressure into himself rather than letting it loose. Every second was agony. Every second was his. My Emperor. Perturabo's voice broke the silence, flat, hard as iron, barely masking fury. Horus turned. Perturabo stood beneath the hololith, massive even by Primarch standards, encased in brutal siege armor, bristling with weapons and mechadendrites. Servo skulls orbited him in tight, aggressive patterns, projecting data scrolls and casualty tallies. His face was a mask of resentment, etched into iron. Beside him drifted Mortarion, his wings furled tight, a miasma of rot clinging to him like a cloak. His presence made the air sour, Vox spirits crackling in protest. Unlike Perturabo, Mortarion made no attempt to hide his hatred. The chamber doors thundered shut behind them. Speak, Horus said. The word carried power. Reality leaned in to listen. Perturabo did not flinch. I am done being ignored. Horus raised an eyebrow, slowly, deliberately. I built this Imperium, Perturabo continued. Its walls, its bastions, its void fortresses. The Sol system would have fallen to itself by now, without my hand on its throat. And yet, his gauntlet slammed against a data slate, cracking it in half. You rule alone. You issue edicts. You deny me my due. You have recognition, Horus said calmly. I want authority, Perturabo snapped. Name me War Master of this new Imperium. Let the galaxy know who truly holds it together. The word hung heavy in the chamber. War Master. For a heartbeat, the pain in Horus's skull spiked violently. The warp howled approval. Old memories surged. Glory, brotherhood, betrayal. He crushed them down. "No," Horus said. Perturabo's eyes burned. "Then you are a fool." Before Horus could reply, Mortarion moved. "I will not be ruled by another tyrant," Mortarion rasped, his wings unfurling slightly, clouds of corpse smoke spilling across the floor. "You speak of order, Horus, of restraint, of tithes and governance." His scythe scraped across the stone. "But your Imperium rots from the inside. You bind humanity tighter than the Emperor ever did." "You chose this path," Horus said. "I chose freedom," Mortarion hissed, "and I see none here." Perturabo turned sharply. "You're abandoning Terra." "I am abandoning you," Mortarion replied. "My legion follows. Where we go is no concern of yours." Horus studied him for a long moment. He could stop him. He could tear Mortarion apart with a thought. He did not. "Go," Horus said. Mortarion's laughter was dry and bitter. Without another word, he turned and drifted from the chamber, doors slamming shut behind him like a tomb's ceiling. Silence followed. Perturabo exhaled slowly. "Your bleeding strength," he said. "They're fracturing, all of them." "I know," Horus replied. He gestured, and the hololith shifted. The galaxy bloomed before them in brutal clarity. Entire regions were blacked out, voids where the Astronomicon's death had left humanity blind. Green tides marked Orc empires swelling unchecked. Slithering void runes indicated worse, things that fed on darkness and silence. "Xenos incursions have increased by 40%, Perturabo said grimly. "Former Imperium sectors, all cut off, isolated. They're falling. Billions dead. Trillions if the projections are true." Horus stared at the map. So much red. So many dead. "This was not the plan," he said quietly. "No," Perturabo agreed. "But this is what happens when gods die." Another data stream flared. Angron. His sigil pulsed violently across dozens of systems. "He's pushing hard," Perturabo said. "He's reporting total victory across multiple human sectors." Horus's jaw tightened. "But those worlds surrendered years ago." "Yes," Perturabo said flatly. "But he crushed them anyway." Silence followed. "Have my orders been acknowledged?" Horus asked. Perturabo did not meet his gaze. "Angron has been radio silent for months." Something cold settled in Horus's chest. "What about Fulgrim?" Perturabo hesitated. "He's on Terra." Horus turned sharply. "What?" "His location is unclear," Perturabo continued. "Our augurs detect activity, but it's erratic." Horus felt something twist inside him. Not pain this time, but something older. "Find him," he ordered. Moments later, coordinates flashed into existence. Horus said nothing. He turned and strode from the chamber, warp energy flaring violently with every step. The transport screamed through Terra's poison skies, cutting low through ash storms and warp lightning. Horus stood alone within it, gripping the bulkhead as whispers clawed at his mind. "This is what you wanted. Freedom, truth, silence," Horus growled. The craft descended, the doors opened, and Horus stepped into hell. A vast amphitheater sprawled before him, carved from the bones of ruined hives. Thousands of humans, gaunt, broken, terrified, were herded into cages and pits. Above them, Emperor's children Astartes were reclined on elevated platforms, laughing and drinking. In the center, gladiators, human men and women, armed with crude weapons, were forced to fight one another while warp-augmented monsters were released among them for sport. Blood soaked the sand. Screams rose in a constant, obscene chorus. Fulgrim lounged at the heart of it all. Beautiful, monstrous, reclining on a throne of flesh and silk. His serpentine form coiled lazily as he watched a man get torn apart by a shrieking aberration. He clapped delicately. Marvelous, Fulgrim purred. The moment Horus stepped forward, the warp shuddered. His presence slammed into the arena like a meteor. Fulgrim, he roared. The sound was apocalyptic. Every Emperor's children warrior froze. Weapons fell from their hands. Demons screeched and fled. The screams of the crowd died instantly, swallowed by raw terror. Fulgrim slowly rose, not in fear, but in delight. "Oh," he breathed, "you came to watch." Horus's aura flared violently, cracks racing across the ground beneath his feet. "This ends," Horus snarled. "Now." Fulgrim smiled wider. "You sound angry, brother." Horus took a step forward, warp energy screaming around him. "I did not kill our father," he said, voice shaking with rage. "So you could turn humanity into toys." Fulgrim laughed softly, and in that laughter Horus finally understood. The war had never been about winning. It had been about what survived afterward, and he was standing alone. Horus did not shout again. He did not need to. The warp bent around him as he stepped forward, his presence crushing the amphitheater into a hush deeper than silence. Dust lifted from the blood-soaked sand and hung frozen in the air. Every living thing felt it. The humans in their cages, the Emperor's children on their gilded balconies, the demons lurking at the edges of reality. The weight of an emperor had arrived. "Fulgrim," Horus said. "End this now. You have one last chance." Fulgrim's smile did not fade. If anything, it sharpened. He slid from his throne of flesh with serpentine grace, landing lightly upon the sand. His form was perfection warped into obscenity, muscle flowing like liquid, skin shimmering with unnatural hues, multiple eyes blinking open along his neck and shoulders. He spread his arms theatrically, gesturing to the carnage. "Ends," Fulgrim purred. "Oh brother, this is art. This is honesty. This is what humanity truly is when you strip away the lies and the rules and the guilt." Horus's claw flexed, talons biting into the stone beneath his feet. "Kneel." The word cracked like thunder. "Kneel before me," Horus continued, warp fire flaring around him. "Kneel before your emperor. End this abomination, now." For a heartbeat, just one, Fulgrim hesitated. Then he laughed. It was a beautiful sound, musical, but cruel. "No," Fulgrim said softly. A ripple passed through the Emperor's children. Some leaned forward eagerly, others stiffened, suddenly uncertain. "You see," Fulgrim continued, circling Horus like a predator admiring its prey. "This is the problem. You won, Horus. You shattered our father, and you broke the galaxy open. And now you want to govern it. He leaned in close. How small. Horus's aura flared, cracking the sand into molten glass. I am holding this Imperium together by will alone. And that, Fulgrim replied, is why you will fail. He straightened, spreading his arms wide, addressing the arena. Look at him, clinging to structure, to restraint, to rules. He has the power of the gods in his veins, and he uses it to rebuild cages. The Emperor's children roared their approval. Fulgrim turned back to Horus, his eyes alight with venomous delight. You've grown weak, brother, afraid. You lack the vision to lead what comes next. Something inside Horus snapped. The pain vanished. The whispers stopped. Now there was only rage. Horus moved. The impact was cataclysmic. He crossed the distance in a heartbeat, his claw smashing into Fulgrim with the force of a collapsing star. The shockwave tore through the amphitheater, vaporizing dozens of Emperor's children instantly and hurling others screaming into the air. Stone, bone, and flesh disintegrated into a storm of debris. Fulgrim laughed as he flew, twisting midair, landing in a skid of shattered stone. Yes, he cried. There he is. They clashed. Horus struck with brutal fury, every blow meant to kill. Fulgrim danced between strikes, his form bending impossibly, countering with blades of warp light, lashes of barbed flesh, sonic screams that shattered reality itself. Each impact tore chunks from the arena. Humans died by the hundreds just from the shockwaves, their bodies pulped into gore. Fulgrim lunged, blade slicing across Horus's chest, carving deep into the corrupted ceramite. Warp fire sprayed from the wound. Horus did not slow. He caught Fulgrim by the throat. The ground collapsed beneath them as Horus drove Fulgrim down, hammering him again and again into the sand. Each blow cracked Fulgrim's perfect form, breaking bones, rupturing organs that reknit themselves with obscene speed. You forget, Horus snarled, slamming Fulgrim's face into the ground. You forget who killed our father. Fulgrim shrieked with laughter and pain. He stabbed upward, blades punching through Horus's side. Demons screamed their approval as warp energy exploded outward. Horus roared, not in pain, but in fury. He tore the blades free, grabbed Fulgrim by the arms and pulled. The sound was indescribable. Fulgrim's torso began to split, flesh tearing, warp light pouring from the wound as his snake-like body writhed and screamed, not in fear, but in ecstatic agony. Yes, Fulgrim gasped. Do it. Be honest. Horus's eyes burned like twin suns. No, he said. Be silent. He crushed Fulgrim's skull in his claw. The Emperor's children screamed. Warp light erupted violently, Fulgrim's death shriek tearing through the immaterium itself. Reality buckled. Demons howled in fury and disbelief as Fulgrim's essence was torn apart. Not offered, not exalted, but destroyed. The body hit the ground in pieces, dead, truly dead. Silence followed, then chaos. The Emperor's children charged. Dozens of them hurled themselves at Horus, shrieking in rage and devotion. They died like insects. Horus tore through them with obscene violence, ripping Astartes in half, crushing their skulls with casual blows, vaporizing squads with warp-fueled shockwaves. Blood rained across the arena, armor crumpled like paper, screams ended abruptly. Within moments, the sand was piled high with corpses. Horus stood amid the carnage, his chest heaving, warp fire roaring around him like a solar storm. "Kneel," he thundered. The surviving Emperor's children froze. Slowly, but hesitantly, many dropped to one knee, weapons falling from numb hands. Their armor trembled, their faith was shattered. But some did not kneel. They stood defiant, their eyes wild, their faces twisted with devotion to excess and ruin. Horus looked at the kneeling ones. "Kill them." For a moment no one moved. Then the Emperor's children turned on one another. Bolters roared, blades flashed. Brothers tore brothers apart in shrieking fury. The arena dissolved into a nightmare of betrayal and blood, loyalty measured in survival and terror. Horus watched. He did not intervene. His rage simmered, barely contained, as realization burned through him. They never planned for this. Not the Emperor, not Horus, not the gods. Winning had been simple. What came after was impossible. As the last screams echoed and the sand drank deep of Astartes' blood, Horus lifted his gaze. Beyond reality, beyond sight, the warp churned. The Chaos gods watched, and they were no longer amused. Wrath rippled through the immaterium. Hunger sharpened, power coiled, angry and possessive. Their champion had crossed a line. Horus Lupercal stood amid the ruins of Terra, hands still dripping with his brother's blood, as the gods he defied began to turn their gaze upon him. Years passed again. Fewer noticed. There were not enough people left to keep count. The galaxy had begun to empty, not slowly or mercifully. Entire sectors vanished in howling storms of madness as chaos devoured without plan or restraint. Worlds burned not for conquest, but for sensation. Populations were flayed for pleasure, sacrificed for amusement, or simply erased in tides of demonic excess that left nothing behind but screaming echoes in the warp. Humanity did not fall fighting. It was consumed. Hive worlds died in days. Forge worlds screamed for weeks before collapsing into demon furnaces that devoured their own atmospheres. Shrine worlds were defiled so thoroughly that even memory recoiled from them. There were no evacuations, no reinforcements, no Astronomicon to guide fleets. The warp was a storm without horizon, and space itself became a maze of dead ends and screaming graves. Trillions were dead, and slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the warp changed. The screams thinned, the tides grew sluggish. Demons that had once manifested in endless legions now flickered. Their forms were unstable, their presence less absolute. Entire warbands found their patrons silent, their blessings unreliable. Great rituals failed. Demonic hosts starved for sensation in a galaxy that no longer had enough souls to feed them. Chaos had eaten too much. The gods had gorged themselves into weakness, and somewhere beyond the madness, something endured. Ultramar. Imperium Secundus, had not merely survived, it had adapted. Its borders were not marked by warp beacons or astropathic choirs, but by patrol fleets, signal relays, and cold, relentless vigilance. The realm was smaller than the old Imperium by several orders of magnitude, but it was real, governed, defended, and alive. And the people knew. Refugee fleets came blind and broken from the void, ships held together by prayers, scavenged parts, and desperation. Many never arrived. Some emerged from warp translation so mangled they died moments later. But those that reached Ultramar found order, found food, found silence unmarred by screams. They found hope. On the orbital docks of Macrage, the sky was crowded with ships. Warships, not relics or desperate stopgaps. New vessels, forged in disciplined yards, their hulls untainted by warp growth. Their machine spirits were clean and cold. Legion banners flew once more, not in rebellion, but in unity. Rabute Gilliman stood at the edge of the dock, his hands clasped behind his back, his blue armor immaculate despite the years. His face was harder now, sharper. The weight of extinction had carved lines no gene forging could erase. "The last transports are loaded," he said. "Civilian convoys have been rerouted deeper into secured space." Beside him, Lion L. Johnson watched the movement of ships with a predatory focus. His armor was dark, unadorned, the sigils of the Dark Angels stripped back to their most ancient forms. "Good," the Lion said. "We will not need to look back." A low growl of amusement answered him. Lehman Russ leaned against a bulkhead, Fenrisian runes carved deep into his armor, frost clinging to the edges despite the void beyond. His wolves prowled nearby, restless, sensing war. "It's about damn time," Russ said. "I was starting to think we'd rot here, waiting for the galaxy to die properly." Gilliman turned to face them both. "Our forces are replenished," he said. "Not to Legion strength, not even close. But they are trained, disciplined, and united. The Ultramarines, the Dark Angels, and the Space Wolves, all fighting as one." "And the enemy?" the Lion asked. Gilliman's jaw tightened. "Scattered, hungry, growing weak." Russ's grin was savage. "Good." Gilliman met their eyes. "We are done hiding. Whatever remains of humanity will not survive another age of waiting. If the galaxy is to have a future, it will be taken by force." The Lion nodded. "Then let us remind our brothers what Primarchs were made for." The order was given, fleets moved, and for the first time in centuries, the void carried purpose instead of despair. Terra screamed. It had never stopped screaming. The throne world was no longer a planet, so much as a wound held open by will alone. The warp storms around it had thickened into permanent cyclones of unreality, their lightning tearing chunks from orbiting debris fields that had once been moons, stations, or cities. At the heart of it all stood Horus, or what remained of him. The Imperial Palace had grown again, taller, wider, wrong. Its towers were fused into each other by impossible geometries, corridors looping back into themselves, walls pulsing faintly like diseased organs. The throne room no longer existed as a single location. It folded differently each time Horus entered it. He sat upon a throne that hurt to look at. His body had continued its slow betrayal. The bindings he had once reforged were cracking now, runes flaking away like rust. One leg ended in a clawed limb of warp crystal. His chest had split entirely, a permanent wound of seething energy, barely contained by chains of blackened adamantium hammered directly into his flesh. His face was barely his own. Multiple eyes blinked and closed along his temples. His mouth had been torn wider, teeth elongated into something bestial, and yet somewhere behind the corruption, his original gaze still burned. With hatred, with regret, with loathing so deep it eclipsed his pain. Horus ruled, but he did not govern. He issued fewer edicts each year. Entire sectors went silent without comment. His court had thinned to a handful of terrified warlords and demon things that dared not speak unless summoned. He hated what he had made. He hated what he had become. Most of all, he hated that he was right. A trembling herald knelt before him, voice barely audible over the howling warp. "My Emperor, a message." Horus did not move. "Speak." "It is Magnus." That name still hurt. "He is under attack," the herald continued. "A coordinated assault. Multiple ships. Loyalist signatures." Horus's many eyes narrowed. "Who?" he demanded. The herald swallowed. "Ultramarines, Dark Angels, Space Wolves." Silence fell. Then the throne cracked. Horus rose slowly, chains screaming as they were dragged across the stone. Warp light flared violently around him. "So," he murmured, "they still live." Prospero burned again, not with the uncontrolled madness of chaos, but with precision. Void shields collapsed under synchronized bombardment. Orbital defenses were silenced within hours by strikes that had anticipated their every response. Thunderhawks and drop pods punched through the atmosphere in disciplined waves, not screaming prayers, but targeting coordinates calculated to the second. The Thousand Suns fought back with sorcery that twisted the sky into spirals of fire and impossible color. Reality buckled under their spells. Mountains folded in on themselves. Space walls were crushed beneath psychic gravity wells. Dark angels were erased by blades of pure thought. But still, the Loyalists advanced. Ultramarines moved in perfect formations, their bolter fire cutting through warp constructs with merciless efficiency. Dark Angels struck from unexpected vectors, teleporting into sanctums thought unreachable, their plasma weapons burning through wards that had stood since the Great Crusade. Space wolves charged straight into hell itself, their axes howling, ripping apart sorcerers with joyous fury. At the heart of it all, Magnus watched. His planet shook beneath him. His cyclopean form loomed over the battlefield, warp lightning crackling from his staff as he unleashed devastation upon the attackers. Entire companies vanished under his wrath. Titans toppled. The air itself screamed his name. And yet, they did not break. "They should not be here," Magnus snarled, hurling a wave of force that flattened a mountain range. "The warp is sealed. The paths are dead." Still they came. Gilliman led the central thrust, blade blazing with controlled fury. The lion struck beside him, silent and lethal, cutting through demonic guardians with surgical precision. Russ howled laughter as he leapt through psychic fire, crashing into Magnus's defenses like a comet. They reached the inner sanctum together. Magnus turned too late. Russ struck first, his spear punching through Magnus's leg, pinning him with a roar of Fenrisian wrath. The lion followed, blades severing tendrils of warp energy that lashed out in retaliation. Guilliman drove forward, his power sword biting deep into Magnus's side, forcing the Crimson King to his knees. The world shook. Magnus crashed to the floor, pinned beneath 3 Primarchs. "How?" he demanded, fury and disbelief warring in his single eye. "How did you reach me? Warp travel is impossible." Guilliman leaned in close, voice cold and absolute. "We didn't use the warp." The words had barely left Guilliman's mouth when the air behind them chained, not with the shriek of sorcery or with the thunder of artillery, but with stillness. A pressure settled across the inner sanctum, heavy and ancient, like the moment before a forge hammer fell. Warp light flickered, flames guttered low. Even Magnus felt it, an instinctive recoil, as if something had stepped into the room that did not belong to the warp at all. Then a voice filled the silence. Deep, calm, carved from fire and patience. "You always relied too much on the Immaterium, Magnus." The Crimson King froze. Slowly, Magnus turned his head. Behind the 3 loyalist Primarchs stood a 4th. Vulcan. He was enormous, even by Primarch standards. Broader than Russ, heavier than Guilliman, his blackened armor etched with sigils of containment and renewal rather than war. The drake's scaled plates glowed faintly, as if heat still lived beneath them. His great hammer rested against his shoulder, its head marked by circuitry and offering runes unlike any forged since the Great Crusade. His eyes burned like coals banked for centuries. Magnus stared. "No," he whispered. "You died." Vulcan inclined his head. "I endured." Russ barked a savage laugh. "Told you he was hard to kill." Magnus's gaze snapped between them, disbelief cracking into something raw and dangerous. "You were lost, broken in the webway. The Emperor abandoned you." "He did not," Vulcan said quietly. The words hit harder than a blow. Magnus recoiled as if hit. "You lie." "I was guided," Vulcan replied. He stepped forward, boots crunching across fractured marble and crystallized warp residue. With each step, the sorcery saturating the chamber recoiled, warps guttering out like candles drowned in oil. "Since Terra, since the moment our father fell, a voice remained." Guilliman did not look at Vulcan, but his jaw tightened. The lion's eyes flicked once toward him, a silent confirmation. Magnus's single eye widened. "Impossible. He was annihilated. I felt it." "You felt his death," Vulcan said, "not his end." The chamber trembled as Magnus's psychic presence surged instinctively, warp energy coiling around him like a wounded snake. "You dare claim the Emperor still speaks? To you?" Vulcan's expression did not change. Not as he was, not whole. A fragment, a will, a purpose, bound into the webway, beyond the reach of the gods you sold yourself to. The words cut deep. He showed me what he had been building, Vulcan continued. What Magnus the Loyal would have finished, had pride not blinded him. I walked paths you were meant to guard. I sealed breaches you helped create. I forged gates not of warp, but of will and geometry and sacrifice. Magnus roared. The sound shattered columns, sent psychic shockwaves ripping outward. Warp fire exploded from his staff as he tore himself free of the spears pinning his leg, rising in a storm of sorcery. I was right, Magnus thundered. I sought knowledge to save us. You hid like a blacksmith playing God in tunnels beneath reality. Vulcan met the outburst like stone meets surf. You sought power, Vulcan said, and when you failed, you blamed our father for not forgiving your arrogance. The 1,000 suns rallied outside. From shattered corridors and warped sanctums they poured. Sorcerers, wreathed in impossible colour. Rubric marines marching with soulless precision. Demonic constructs screaming praise to the changer of ways. Guilliman drew his blade in a single smooth motion. Time to leave. No, Russ growled. His eyes were locked on Magnus. The Wolf King stepped forward, frost crackling along his armor, spear rising into his grip. This one's mine. Magnus sneered, though doubt flickered behind his fury. You think yourself my executioner, dog? Russ's grin was all teeth. I've been chasing you for a long, long time. The lion nodded once. Guilliman hesitated, then inclined his head. So be it, Guilliman said. End it. Magnus screamed in fury and unleashed hell. The Primarchs collided like gods. Russ struck again and again, relentless, savage. Every blow fueled by centuries of rage and loss. Magnus countered with sorcery that could have ended stars. You feel it, don't you? Russ snarled as Magnus staggered. The leash tightening. Magnus lashed out, claws raking across Russ's armor, tearing ceramite, drawing blood that hissed on the ground. You are nothing without hatred. Russ laughed even as he bled. Then I'm everything. He drove the spear through Magnus's heart. The Crimson King screamed, a sound of agony, fury, and finally understanding. His form began to fracture, warp light spilling from widening cracks as his essence unraveled. No, Magnus gasped. I can still. Russ twisted the spear and tore it free. For Prospero, he growled and struck again, severing Magnus's head in a blow that split the air itself. The psychic backlash was apocalyptic. Sorcerers collapsed screaming as their spells imploded. Demons howled as bindings failed. The 1,000 suns broke, some dissolving into ash, others cut down as they fled. The Loyalists fell back in perfect order, firing as they moved, dragging their wounded, covering retreats. Russ threw Magnus's burning corpse aside and sprinted for his ship, laughing like a storm given voice. The last space wolves boarded as the fortress began to collapse beneath them. Vulcan was the last to board the ship. He turned, looking once more at Prospero, at the burning towers, the screaming warp, the ruin of a brother's ambition. Aboard Guilliman's strike cruiser in orbit, the Loyalist Primarchs stood together once more, scarred, bloodied, but alive. Russ wiped Magnus's blood from his spear. That, he said with savage satisfaction, was a long time coming. Guilliman exhaled slowly. The galaxy has changed, The lion sheathed his blade. Again. "Our father's war isn't over," Vulcan said. "It never was. But now, we fight on ground chaos shows no dominion over." He turned back to them, fire in his eyes. "Let us take this galaxy back, one world at a time." The galaxy did not collapse all at once. It fractured. After Prospero, after Magnus's scream was torn from reality and silenced forever, something fundamental shifted. The warp recoiled like a wounded beast. Its storms did not vanish, but they lost direction. Its currents no longer answered to singular will or grand design. Chaos had gorged itself to the brink of starvation, and now it thrashed blindly, tearing at what remained. Horus felt it first. From the thrown wound of Terra, he sensed the imbalance like a knife lodged behind his eyes. The gods were louder and quieter all at once, howling demands layered over hollow silences. Power still flowed, but it stuttered. Blessings came malformed. Portents contradicted one another. Futures once clear as burning scripture, now fractured into useless shards. And beyond the storms, the loyalists were moving. Imperium Secundus did not announce itself with sermons or proclamations. It advanced with iron, with fleets, with logistics and precision and annihilation delivered without spectacle. The word-bearers were second to fall. Lorgar had carved his realm from a dozen shrine worlds, fused into a single blasphemous constellation. Each planet linked by warp tunnels, choked with scripture and blood. For decades it had been untouchable, a cathedral drifting through unreality. It burned in a month. Dark Angel strike forces translated into real space at the edge of the system, guided not by the warp, but by the webway, by gates that Vulcan had helped forge. Ultramarine battle groups followed in perfect formation, their void shields overlapping, firepower layered with brutal efficiency. Space wolves descended last, howling murder given form. The word-bearers tried to pray. Their gods did not answer fast enough. By the time Lorgar realized what was happening, half his cathedrals were already gone, reduced to clouds of molten scripture and screaming souls that evaporated into a warp too thin to sustain them. He fled, in naked terror, his faith cracking under the realization that his gods could not protect him anymore. Angron did not flee. He raged. The World Eaters had become less a legion and more a migratory apocalypse, fleets moving without purpose, descending on any living world they could reach, slaughtering until nothing moved. When Guilliman's forces found him, it was by accident. An Ultramar patrol responding to a distress signal that should not have been possible to receive. The battle was indescribable. Angron tore through Titans with his bare hands, ripped battle cruisers apart by leaping between them in the vacuum, screaming praises to Khorne that went unanswered. Russ faced him again, blades meeting chain axes in a clash that would crack continents. But this time, Angron did not have the warp at his back. He could not sustain himself. He did not die, but he was broken, bound beneath Vulcan's sigils, entombed in a cage of geometry and will, dragged screaming into a prison that did not exist in any dimension chaos could reach. Fulgrim retreated deeper into the warp, coughing rot and bitterness as Nurgle's gifts curdled without enough living souls to sustain them. The location and status of the other traitors was simply unknown, and Horus watched it all unravel. He tried to impose order. That was his final sin. From Terra, Horus issued commands, rational, structured, but desperate. He demanded consolidation, defensive lines, the abandonment of worthless slaughter in favor of survival. He called his brothers back, summoned the warbands, demanded obedience from monsters who had long since forgotten what obedience meant. They laughed at him. The Black Legion, once his proud sons, had grown into something else entirely. A vast, fractured host bound not by loyalty, but by shared addiction to war and divine favor. Abaddon had risen at their head, not through succession, but through violence, charisma, and the unspoken blessing of all four gods. Where Horus preached restraint, Abaddon promised annihilation. Where Horus spoke of rebuilding, Abaddon spoke of burning what remained and dragging the galaxy into damnation with them. The gods listened to Abaddon. Horus felt them slipping. Perturabo felt it too. The Lord of Iron stood beside Horus in the broken halls of the Imperial Palace, his armor bristling with siege calculations and weapons grown into him like tumors of steel. Terra groaned beneath them, its crust fractured, its skies now forever screaming. "We are losing control," Horus said, his voice heavy with chains and pain. "They do not understand. Chaos cannot rule an empty galaxy." Perturabo's eyes were cold. "They do not care," he replied. "They never did. They want excess. They want screams. You are asking beasts to farm instead of hunt. I am asking them to survive." Perturabo said nothing. The coup came without warning. One moment, Horus was seated upon the throne wound, forcing the warp to heal through sheer will. The next, the palace shook, not with demonic howls, but with disciplined gunfire. Bolters, Astartes' weapons. The Black Legion was inside the palace. Abaddon came at their head, clad in Terminator plate scorched black by 1,000 battles, the talon of Horus crackling with stolen power, his eyes burning with zealotry untempered by doubt. "My father," Abaddon called, striding through the shattered marble and screaming architecture. "You have grown weak." Horus rose, warp light flared, chains snapping free as he tore himself from the throne. "I am trying to save what remains. You would doom us all." Abaddon laughed. "Good." The battle that followed was apocalyptic. Horus tore Black Legionnaires apart with mere gestures, crushing squads into a bloody mist, hurling Abaddon through towers of impossible stone. Demons poured in behind the rebels, eager to feast, only to be annihilated by Perturabo's guns as the Iron Warrior fought with methodical fury. For a moment, it worked. Horus and Perturabo stood back to back, brothers once more, fighting like demigods reborn. Abaddon was wounded, his armor cracked, his champions slain one by one. His talons shattered under a blow that sang across dimensions. Horus seized Abaddon by the throat, lifting him high. "This ends now," he snarled. "You are not my successor." Abaddon spat blood and laughed, even as his strength failed. "No," he rasped. "You are my past." Perturabo fired. Not at Abaddon, at Horus. The shot was perfectly aimed, through the bindings, through his fractured chest, into the core of warp energy that Horus used to sustain himself. Horus screamed, staggered, disbelief eclipsing his rage. "Why?" he demanded. Perturabo stepped forward, his weapon still smoking. "Because you still think this war has rules." Abaddon collapsed, dying, his laughter choking into silence as his life bled out onto the palace floor. The Black Legion faltered, but the gods howled in triumph. Horus turned toward the throne, toward one last attempt to impose meaning. But Perturabo struck again. Horus fell. Not as a god, not as a savior, but as a broken thing, consumed by the same forces he had once tried to master. Chaos rejoiced. The warp screamed in ecstasy as Horus's soul was torn apart and devoured in a feast that shook unreality itself. War was renewed instantly. War without restraint, without hierarchy, without vision. And in their celebration, the gods failed to notice the truth. The galaxy was running out of souls. Imperium Secundus advanced, world by world, reclaiming what little remained. Guilliman's fleets moved through real space lanes chaos could not reach. Vulcan's gates sealed behind them. Russ hunted the remnants, like a predator truly unleashed. Chaos still raged, but it raged weaker, blinder, desperate. And far away the galaxy endured, scarred, diminished, but alive. Hope began to return to the galaxy quietly, not with crusade banners blazing across the void. It returned with food, with silence where screams had once been, with ships that arrived on time. Imperium Secundus did not rebuild the Imperium that had been lost. It could not. The corpse of that empire was too vast, too poisoned by its own collapse. Instead, Guilliman built something smaller, something that could endure. Ultramar prospered. Its worlds were no longer relics clinging to half-remembered dogma, but living engines of survival. Agri-worlds expanded under careful stewardship, their harvests calculated not for tithes, but for sustainability. Forge worlds were stripped of warp taint and rebuilt around Vulcan's principles. Machine spirits cleansed, systems standardized, innovation permitted where it served survival rather than dogma. Most importantly, the webway gates endured. Vulcan's work, begun in silence but perfected in fire, changed everything. These were not the Emperor's ancient arteries of impossible reach. They were new, crude by comparison, narrow and brutally expensive to maintain, but real. Through them, the Imperium Secundus reached outward, not to conquer, but to find the living. The first contact came from a system that should not have existed anymore. A small cluster of mining worlds, sealed behind collapsing warp storms, cut off for decades. Their population had dwindled to a few million, clinging to failing infrastructure and dying suns. When Guilliman's envoys arrived, the survivors believed them to be hallucinations. They were given food, medical supplies, engineers, and a choice. More systems followed, isolated fortress clusters, nomadic fleet that had learned to sail real space without the warp, shrine world remnants where faith had hardened into defiance rather than madness. Imperium Secundus did not demand obedience. It merely offered survival. And in the shadows, chaos watched with growing fury. Perturabo ruled what remained of chaos undivided, with iron efficiency and iron contempt. He had taken Terra, not as a throne but as a fortress. The Imperial Palace was no longer a palace at all, but a labyrinthine bastion of guns, foundries, and overlapping kill zones that sprawled across a world already dead. Warp storms still howled above it, but Perturabo had chained them into predictable cycles, forcing the madness into patterns he could exploit. Abaddon stood at his side, resurrected not by loyalty, but by necessity. The gods had not been willing to lose him, not when Horus was gone and their feast was growing thin. They had dragged Abaddon back from death, reforged his broken body into something harder, colder, and more monstrous than before. Abaddon did not thank them. He took their gifts and sharpened them. Together, Perturabo and Abaddon waged a new kind of war. No grand crusades, no world-ending spectacles. They struck at supply lines, at webway gates, at refugee convoys and half-built bastions. Chaos fleets translated into real space, only where the warp still answered them. And when it did, they hit with merciless precision. Entire relief missions vanished, gates collapsed, Vulcan's creations held, but each loss hurt. Guilliman knew this war would not be won quickly, but that was the point. Time favored Imperium Secundus. Every year Chaos fought, it bled strength it could not replace. Every human world saved was another starved god, another ritual that failed, another demon that flickered and died when summoned. Leman Russ led the hunts. The Wolf King raged far beyond Ultramar's borders, his fleets moving through the webway like predators slipping through tall grass. He did not besiege chaos-held worlds. He butchered them. Warbands vanished without warning. Demon princes were dragged into real space and torn apart where their patrons could not reach them. Russ left no monuments, only silence. The Lion did what he always had. He planned. The Dark Angels became executioners, anticipating chaos movements, striking before their plots could unfold, severing alliances before they formed. Entire campaigns ended before they began. Their architects found dead in sanctums they had believed unbreachable. And Guilliman held the line. He governed, he delegated, he endured. But even as Imperium Secundus grew stronger, the war darkened. Perturabo adapted. He learned the limits of the webway gates, learned the rhythms of Vulcan's geometry, began designing counterstructures, brutal, inelegant things that tore holes in real space by force rather than finesse. Abaddon led the assaults himself. He came for Guilliman once, not in open battle, but through a collapsing gate above an agri-world that fed 6 systems. The sky simply broke. Demons poured through. Millions died in hours. Guilliman arrived too late to stop it. He arrived in time to see Abaddon watching him from orbit, standing upon the hull of his flagship, blade resting on his shoulder in a silent challenge. They did not fight. Not yet, because something else was happening. deep beneath Terra, far below the forges, below the prisons, beneath the cells where even chaos forgot what it had buried, Rogal Dorn still lived. He had not seen the sky in over a century. The cell was barely large enough for him to stand up, carved from a black stone that drank the light and hope alike. Chains bound his wrists and ankles, etched with sigils of pain and suppression. His armor had long since been stripped away. His body, once the immovable bulwark of the Imperium, was now gaunt, scarred and starved. A beard streaked with grey hung from his jaw. His hands trembled when he clenched them. They had broken his bones. They had denied him sleep. They had paraded traitors past his cell, boasting of Guilliman's failure, Russ's death, Vulcan's disappearance. Lies, crafted to grind him down. They had failed. Dorn knelt in the darkness, breathing slowly and stubbornly alive. "I am still here," he whispered, to himself, to the walls, to the galaxy that had forgotten him. Footsteps echoed beyond the bars. He did not look up. Pain followed footsteps here. Instead, there was silence. Then, a voice. Not loud, nor commanding, but enduring. "Remain strong." Dorn's breath caught. His head lifted slowly, eyes narrowing into the darkness. "Who speaks?" he rasped. The chains did not tighten. The warding fields did not flare. The voice came again, closer now. Not from outside the cell, but from within him. "You have held longer than any wall." Dorn swallowed, his vision blurred, not with weakness, but with something far more dangerous. Hope. "My brothers," he whispered. "Are they? They endure." The words carried warmth, pain, pride. Dorn's heart thundered in his chest. He knew that voice. He had heard it on the battlements of Terra, beneath falling stars and dying gods. "No," he murmured. "You are gone. I saw. You saw my death. Not my end." Dorn sagged against the chains, strength finally giving way as exhaustion claimed him. His eyes closed, but his grip on consciousness tightened. "Then tell me," he breathed. "Tell me what to do." The voice was almost gentle. "Endure a little longer, my son." The darkness seemed to retreat just a fraction. "Your brothers are coming." For the first time in decades, Rogal Dorn allowed himself to believe it. In the depths of a broken world, as gods starved and empires clawed their way back from extinction, the last wall of Terra did not fall. He held. The war would rage for years to come. Planets would burn, and fleets would clash in endless cycles of death and fire. But for the first time, amid the ruin and despair, the galaxy had a spark, a fragile, stubborn hope that humanity might endure, and the blood of its heroes could still shape the stars.